I'm Steve Collins. I'm the Net Zero Carbon Programme Manager for the dioceses of Guildford, Chichester and Portsmouth, and I'm going to explain how to fill in the energy footprint tool.
We're going to walk you through completing the energy footprint tool for a church and a church hall, which also has solar panels for generating electricity. The first step is to log into parish returns for your church and then choose the option to enter data using this option here. This will take you to the summary screen. In this example, you can see a parish which has 3 churches. You'll need to submit energy footprint tool information for each church separately if that is the case in your parish. To do this, I'm going to go to the table at the bottom of the page and select the church for which I want to enter data. In this case, Test Church 3. You can see that energy footprint tool has not been completed or submitted for this church yet. This takes me to the summary screen for this church, and I can see the parish name and the church name at the top. To enter my data into the energy footprint tool, click on the Enter Your Data button here. This takes me to the first data entry screen. The first question asks how many buildings I would like to enter data for. In this example, I'm going to talk you through entering data for a church and a church hall where there are 2 separate buildings metered separately with separate energy bills. If you have a combined church and church hall which have 1 meter, you would leave this as 1 building and enter the information for a combined church and church hall below. If you have multiple churches in your parish, you need to enter them as separate records in the EFT. You would do this by going to the Select Church menu. Then scroll down and pick which church you want to enter that information for. Here, we are going to pick Test Church 3. So again, I'm selecting this church and then taken to enter my data screen. I'm going to enter information for 2 buildings, so I enter 2 in this field and click Next. This then asks you to provide summary information for the 2 buildings. You can see here I've got a separate space to enter information about building 1 and then further down a space to enter information about building 2. This first building will be the church. I'm going to give it a meaningful name, and then I'm going to select that it is a church rather than a combined church and church hall. My church has electricity, gas and on-site solar PV. If you have a building which uses a heat pump, you'll need to select green heating technologies here, but also electricity, because that is the electricity source for your heat pump. Then you can scroll down to enter the information for the church hall. I'm going to call this church hall, but of course, give this a name which is meaningful for you in your local context. And I'm going to select that it's a church hall. Now, in my example, the church hall only has an electric boiler, and I'm only selecting electricity. Then scroll down and click Next. This takes me to the first data entry screens. As I'm navigating through the energy footprint tool, I can always see what building I'm entering information for by looking at these tabs on the left-hand side. The tab that is white shows me the building for which I'm currently entering information. So I can see entering information here for the church, and then we will move on and enter information for the church hall. And then any work-related travel. You can also see how far through the energy footprint tool you are at any one point. If you run out of time to complete the EFT or need more information, you can stop and your information entered will be saved. Then you can come back to the tool when you have more time or the additional information. For my church, the main source of heating is a gas boiler, so I select Mains Gas. These questions then relate to my electricity supply, because on the first screen I selected that the church uses both electricity and gas. The list of suppliers you see here, and also when we look down here for gas suppliers, are those suppliers and tariffs that have been determined to be genuinely a green tariff for the purposes of calculating your carbon footprint in the EFT. If you are with one of these suppliers, the energy footprint tool will treat the emissions from the energy they provide to you as net zero carbon. In my church, the energy supply is a green tariff supplied by Ecotricity. If your supplier is not listed here, you would click Other and then enter the name for your supplier. The next question asks if your electricity tariff is green tariff. If it's on the list here, then you would select Yes. It may be that your supplier and tariff are not on the list, but if you are on a form of green tariff and that you specifically selected with your supplier, in which case you would still select Yes under this question, and that would be taken into account in your carbon footprint calculation later. If you're not sure, that's absolutely fine. Just pick the Unsure button. You are then asked to enter how much electricity your church has purchased in the year 2023. For this, you'll need your electricity bills. It asks for the electricity purchased as a total kilowatt hours and the total cost. If you know both, that's great. Please fill in both fields. But if you only know one or the other, that's fine. You can just fill in the other field for which you can just fill in the field for which you have information. If you're able to provide the electricity usage in terms of the units purchased in kilowatt hours, that's more accurate than just providing the cost of electricity, so that's preferred. My church used 13,155 units of electricity, and that cost them £4,286. The next question you're asked is if you're on a single or three-phase electricity supply. You may or may not know that for your church. If you don't know, then please don't guess and instead select Unsure. There are some handy hints in the Help button here on how to determine if you're on single or three-phase electricity supply. In my example, I know that we're on single phase, so I select this. The reasons we're asking for this information is that changing to wholly electricity heating solution increases the energy demand of your church and might require an upgrade to the electricity supply. This is not needed in all cases, but capturing this information about all our churches can help us understand where we might need to be more strategic and find a solution for this, or to consider providing grant support in the future. We then move on to our gas usage. The first question is about your gas supply and tariff, in a similar way to the question about the electricity supply and tariff above. My church is on a green tariff with Green Energy UK. My tariff is a green tariff, and this church purchased 77,251 kilowatt hours of gas that cost them £7,592, substantially more than the electricity. The next question asks about the approximate age of your heating system. This does not need to be a completely accurate figure. An indicative answer here is helpful. In this example, my boiler is quite old and possibly inefficient, so I've entered 15 years. If your church has an old heating system, you should be starting to think as a church about how you will replace the heating system when the boiler comes to its end of life, and how to avoid a situation where the boiler fails in the middle of winter. My church has some solar panels on the roof, so I'm going to answer yes. In this example, I'm imagining the solar panels were installed before I joined this church, so I don't know the installed capacity. If you do know it, please include it here. I do know how much electricity the solar panels generated in 2023. That was 1,500 kilowatt hours. At the bottom of this page, There's a notes section. This is for you to capture any information that impacted your energy usage in 2023, and so would be helpful to somebody else who's looking at the EFT in the future. For example, in this year, was your church closed for a period of time? Or did your electricity usage go up substantially because you shifted from a gas heating system to a low carbon electric heating system? I then click Next to move to entering information for the church hall. We're going to be asked a similar set of questions for the church hall, depending on the type of energy and heating systems I selected on the first page for the church hall. You can see on the left-hand side which building you're currently entering into information for. So here I'm entering information for the church hall, but the name displayed here would be whatever name you have given the church hall building on the initial screen. My church hall is substantially smaller and not as well used as our church, so it just has an electric boiler. We only have the option of electricity for the primary heating fuel because this list depends on what information I've selected on that first initial entry screen for the church hall. The church hall is also with Ecotricity and it's a green tariff. We purchased 22,680 units of electricity in 2023, and that cost us £7,258. This process looks exactly the same as the way we entered information for the church on the previous tab. Again, I'm on single phase electricity, and this is a relatively new heating system, so it's only 5 years old. I'm then going to click Next and move on to the final data entry screen to enter information about work-related travel. Again, on the left-hand side, I can see that we've now moved on to work-related travel section, and you can see that I've completed all the information for the church and the church hall. The first question is whether any work-related travel expenses were claimed in 2023. I'm selecting yes, and then entering the following information. We paid expenses for 360 car miles over 2023, and that was at a cost of £112. Half of these journeys were made in an electric car, so I enter 50% here. You can enter 0 or leave blank if unknown. In this year, we also had work-related travel expenses for rail travel of £55 and £10 for bus travel. Again, I could enter information in the notes field here if there was anything that would be helpful to record. I click Next, and now we've entered all the data for this church and the church hall in the Energy Footprint tool, but I'm not quite finished. You can see here that this EFT is now 100% complete, but it hasn't yet been submitted. And this also is highlighted in the message at the top. I'm happy with the answers, so I'm going to click Submit. It will confirm that I want to submit, and I click OK. After I've submitted my EFT, I realise I've made a mistake. For example, if I was looking at the bills for the wrong year or the bills for the wrong building, I can easily come back to the EFT and can unsubmit the data, which will allow me to go back through and update and make any changes to any of those fields we've entered. Equally, if you realise you've actually made a more significant mistake and entered data for the entirely different church against this church, you could reset all of the data that's there, and it will reset all the values to 0. This screen explains why we're collecting the energy footprint tool information, and you can scroll down and you can see all the information you've entered for the year in question, in this case 2023. If this section shows me the total carbon footprint for the church for this year, based on the information I've entered. It will also show me the comparison to last year, if an EFT was completed in the previous years. Although you can see here that no 2022 data for my test church was entered, so this is showing blank. The pie chart helps to visualize where the majority of your carbon emissions are being generated. For this church, the majority of our carbon emissions comes from the gas usage. So this starts to tell me that if I want to move to a low carbon solution, I should start by looking at our gas heating system. If you scroll down, you can see a graph which shows how your carbon emissions from energy use have changed over time. For my example, we can see that in 2020, the electricity and gas usage was lower than this year, which meant our overall total emissions were also lower. That's not surprising because 2020 was a COVID year, so many of you may see this. For my test church, no EFT data was submitted in 2021 or 2022. The yellow line shows us our total carbon emissions from our energy use and how this has changed over time. The red line shows emissions from electricity and the blue line shows emissions from just gas. If you scroll down further, we give you some suggestions about interpreting the carbon footprint. One point to make here is not to get too hung up on small fluctuations from year to year, and especially if you've had any changes in patterns of your use over that year. For example, was your building closed for renovation? Or had your heating system failed in a given year? If it's been a period of extremely cold weather this year, you'll see your energy use go up. Equivalently, if it's been a mild year, you'll see your energy usage go down. What you really want to look at is those long-term trends to understand how you're progressing on your journey to net zero carbon. If you scroll down a bit further, we give suggestions on initial points you should think about in driving down your carbon emissions. And then further down, sources of more information which you can click through. Lastly, if you scroll down a bit further, you can then see a summary of all the information you've entered into the EFT today. On completion of the EFT, we are encouraging parishes to print off a report and take to your annual PCC meeting for discussion and to consider your first or next steps in your net zero carbon journey. To do this, you can click on Print and download the report. You'll first see this pop-up window which explains how to save the report as a PDF. You would then click on the Open Print dialog and go down through the process and save it as a PDF. This will look slightly different depending on your own computer and operating system, so I won't walk you through this here and will cancel instead. One last thing to say is you can now see here that your energy footprint tool is 100% complete and submitted.
And that's it. Go and fill in yours.